Hare Krishna. So I'm continuing on with this attempt to tell about my own history in the last 50 years in Krishna consciousness, or shall I say, trying to be in Krishna consciousness. And the last video I did took us up to, I think, 74, when I had moved to France, to Paris. So this video, I will try to go through 75 and 76. We'll see how it goes. So there was just so much happening at this time that, I don't intend to continue speaking this long on all the 50 years. But, this part where Srila Prabhupada was with us is there just so much was going on that I'm spending more time here. And let me just say a prayer to Srila Prabhupada, so there's something useful that may come from my mouth. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pastaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gaura Bani Pacharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paskacha Desatarni Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Panchakalpatarubhyascha, Kripasinabhyevacha, Patitanam Pavanebhyo, Vaishnavebhyo, Namo Namaha. So continuing on from 1975, it just continued with mega expansion in every way. Devotees, books, properties, everything was happening so fast, and we were so busy that we could hardly really assess what was happening. It's just caught up in this storm. Sometimes people wonder, why did we do the things that we did, and why didn't we do this or that? And I think a lot of it was just that things were happening so fast that it was hard to even digest what was going on or to reflect on it, because we're just in the midst of it so much. And Prabhupada was pushing so much. So there was a major growth happening. I'm focusing on the places where I was, how it was, where I was. And of course, it's different everywhere, according to when you joined, where you joined, whatever. But this is just my experience. So in France, one of the biggest things that happened this year was that there was a purchase of the new Mayapur property. That when Prabhupada had come in 74, he had told the local management that they should acquire a rural property connected to the city temple in Paris. This was an idea that Prabhupada pushed forward everywhere, that there should be our city preaching centers, and they could be connected, when possible, to a farming community. That way we could bring, in so many ways, we could support each other and, provide a very much needed better facilities and favorable environment for the increasing numbers of devotee families, especially, to begin to develop this very big, Srila Prabhupada wanted it to be a very big aspect of ISKCON's development, which would be the farm communities. So around this time is when Prabhupada started talking about this quite a bit, and the necessity for it, and how to go about it. There's many conversations where Prabhupada is talking about how important it would be for us to have these farming communities for many reasons. Now, in 1975, I was not there when Srila Prabhupada visited again, but apparently he visited several properties in France, and finally chose this beautiful castle. I think at the time was called Domaine d'Aublaise, which later became New Mayapur. And it was a beautiful historic chateau built around 1900, and it was surrounded by 80 hectares of forests and pasture in a rural area about an hour's drive from the Loire Valley, which was a famous tourist attraction known for its historic towns and vineyards and abundance of chateaus. It was a place of chateaus, very beautiful. And so Srila Prabhupada felt that this property would be perfect for the devotees, and he managed to charm the owner into selling it much cheaper than he would have liked to. Prabhupada had such a Shakti. And it took some time before, all of the sales was processed and everything, so I don't think the devotees moved in until much later in 75. But that was when there was just an explosion, a major expansion. And the first Gurukula in France was there. And so as far as the mood of the times and what was changing, what was going on, well, I would say, at least where I was, and I think it was reflected throughout the ISKCON world, that there was starting to be more of a gap between, leaders, sannyasis, and regular devotees. Up to a certain point, we were all just one. We had different positions, but we all did everything together. And, there wasn't so much higher and lower ideas, So we all called each other Prabhu, and it was just a respectful address. It had nothing at all to do with gender. But I think in America, of course, that's the American history, which I'm not going to tell, but, whatever was going on in America did have some effect on the European devotees as well. So, between 74 and 76, the famous Radha Damodar party was there, and, doing incredible preaching and distributing books, but also causing quite a rift between the Grihastas and the renunciates. And there was a very strong emphasis at that time on renunciation. Whoever you were, even ladies, it was like, that's what's cool, being renounced. And, there were even many ladies who started to wear white. You imagine these beautiful young girls in their 20s putting on white like widows, but because, Prabhupada mentioned that the women didn't take sannyas. And, but we had no idea that that's not really a glorious and wonderful thing to be wearing white, as it is to be a sannyasi or renunciate, that it's actually, considered a very sad thing, that a young woman is in white, so we really didn't have any sense of these things. But, we're all trying to pick up this mood of being renounced, and of course it did cause a lot of conflict. And I think a lot less in, at least where I was, because Radha Damodar parties were not there. So there was less of that. But there was this, mood of renunciation. And there was a strong sense of hierarchy, that everyone had to have authority, and we had to follow authority. It's like being in the army. And there was a general respect for the GBC, and they were relevant to our lives, and we were interested in what was going on in their meetings and things. And of course, it wasn't happening in France. This happened in LA, but it's just such an amazing thing that happened in May, June, July, I think, of 75, was the Chaitanya Charitamrita Marathon, where the entire CC was put together in a few months, and all that artwork and all that, that was just something absolutely miraculous. And then these, stories of Lord Chaitanya, started filtering in as we got one book after another, and it was just tremendous. I mean, this is a magical time. Those devotees who took part in that marathon, I'm certain that they have a ticket back to Godhead, for what they did and bringing the message and the life and the pastimes of Mahaprabhu to the Western world for the first time. It's so miraculous and beautiful, so beautiful. If you think that at the time of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he was searching for a few years, I think, to even find one copy of the Chaitanya Charitamrita. So it was astonishing to just, have thousands of sets coming off of the printer. This a beautiful history that, old generations, must appreciate. But, it was noticeable there was starting to be, maybe you would say cracks in relationships. Because there was so much pressure on many levels. Families, imagine, just trying to do everything. There was no question. Everybody had to go to Mangal. Everyone had to go to Bhagavatam. Everyone had to follow these things, do the preaching. And, you're having children to deal with, and, just outgrowing all of our facilities. And, it wasn't easy to function on such a high level and to practice on such a high level. So, there were starting to be more visible cracks, I would say, around this time. And, a lot of devotees joining, but also some devotees leaving or blooping, as we called it in those days. But, with expansion and with growth also comes, very heavy demand, to work and the strain to get the money that we needed, to do all of these projects. There was a lot of pressure to work under. You have to consider we were like buying properties costing millions of dollars. Like New Mayapur is massive place, a massive cost, and this was paid for by, a handful of just hard-working Sankirtan devotees. Really. It just, what they did to establish these properties, to establish the movement, to have substantial places. And even though there's been so many problems and whatever, but most of these properties, many of them, at least in France, they're still existing throughout Europe. And, I wish there could be some kind of a festival to honor all the simple Sankirtan devotees that, we know the famous people, the names of many amazing of the first devotees and whatever, but believe me, there were a lot of other devotees, all of those devotees that are doing Sankirtan at that time. Simply glorious, simply glorious. So, France was expanding like crazy, and there was some discontent. I would say that was primarily amongst the French devotees, who were mostly the translators. They were, maybe you would say, like the French Brahmana group. Very smart, very talented devotees. who were just busy all day, working on translations. Very, an amazing group of devotees also that work like, a lot of devotees are just, all the books are just there. And, you just don't think about what it took, to do all that work, So, yeah, I'd like to do a party for the translators as well, to acknowledge the seva. But those French devotees, mostly French devotees, they were not so happy with Bhagavan's leadership for a variety of reasons. And they brought their concerns to Srila Prabhupada. Ultimately, Srila Prabhupada, he overrided their concerns and he wanted to keep it as it was because so much was really going on. He was seeing very positive results. So sometimes we have to tolerate certain things because, Prabhupada would weigh the results, and no one could deny that since Bhagavan had come as a leader in France, it was really developing, It wasn't perfect, but it was really happening. And so, like it or not, he continued on. Now I will have to talk about something that is embarrassing to me. But if we don't tell our true histories, then I don't think there's much point in telling them, to just make it a candy-coated version of Krishna consciousness. I think, most devotees, not everyone, there's some very, very special devotees, but, most of the general devotees, we have difficulties in our lives. We go through stages. We go through ups and downs and highs and lows. And I think it's important to document those things as well so that people, devotees in the future, see, we didn't have any elders to see, to give, wise elders, they help society. But we didn't have that. We were all pretty much in the same age group. So, we all had different struggles. So for me, I hit a Maya patch. Well, I could say I was probably always in Maya, but serious problem. It was, basically the age-old problem of attraction to the opposite gender. And of course, that may be different nowadays, but, lust. And I don't think it's necessary to go into sordid details of it. It wasn't all that bad, but I became attracted to a devotee who was also married. Now, I'm married to Narottam, and he was also married, and he also had a similar, very unusual type of marriage that was a marriage but wasn't really a marriage. And so, I started associating, talking to him frequently, meeting, discussing, going on walks together, and getting very close to falling into deep illusion. And I'm speaking about this because it's one of the biggest lessons in my life. So, and we all have to learn these things. And some people learn the hard way, and some people learn from reading Shastra or observing. And this was a practical experience I had of how Maya works and how Maya tricks us. And I was thinking that I was just attracted to this person's spiritual qualities. I thought he was a really deep person. He was somewhat mystical. And I think it's a common problem of how we can mistake the mundane for the spiritual. it can look a little similar. And how we can rationalize almost anything when we become attached to it. And this went on for some time. And I'm quite sure that everyone around, although nobody really mentioned it to me, and everyone saw it was plain as the nose on my face that there was complete Maya going on here. But I was blind to it until eventually it turned blatantly very mundane. And I was shocked at what I had become entangled in. And at that point, I had to choose Maya or Krishna. And thank Krishna that he gave me at least enough intelligence to remember that I really did not come to Krishna consciousness for this, that I was well aware that there was no bright future in it, and that at some point I understood this is really Maya, straight and simple. And so I had to turn away from it. But it wasn't easy. And, I just bring all this up because maybe other people go through these things, and then it's nice to know somehow you can survive. And then I understood at that point that it was required that I really had to take shelter. I chanted so strongly, and I was begging, and I was praying, and I was staying very, very busy in devotional service, to counteract this effects. And, looking back at it, I realize more how, just how easily we can destroy our spiritual life and how very dangerous it is to play with Maya. So fortunately, we put an end to it, but, it wasn't easy, and it took a long time to see it, for what it was. Now, unfortunately, that devotee, although he was a very nice devotee, very intelligent, very, maybe he didn't learn the same lesson. And eventually he went with another woman, and he left Krishna consciousness. And he traveled down a dark path. He left, and he got AIDS, and eventually he died. And I understand that could have been me. So taking shelter of Krishna when we are challenged, these are big, big life lessons. And so, we have to speak about them even. It's uncomfortable, it's embarrassing. No, I'm not a great devotee. I was totally in Maya. And, because sometimes, I know my daughter told me once, it just seems like everybody was so fired up and everybody was great devotees, and we're not like that. And I was like, no, actually, majority of us have been through a lot of struggle. Actually, incidentally, that devotee was, a lot of people know this story of, he was one of the first devotees to go out to Radhakund. And that was one of the things that I found so attractive in him, that he was telling all these stories about Radhakund, and, it seemed like, wow, the glories of Radharani and everything. It was attractive. But Prabhupada very heavily chastised him when he heard he had gone out to stay a little bit in Radhakund. And at the time, I couldn't understand why was Prabhupada so heavy with him? But Prabhupada understood that he had become polluted. And these are very subtle things, but Prabhupada said, You have not been in Radhakund, you've been in Narakakund. It's like a hellish place. So Srila Prabhupada understood, we're very naive. We're very naive. And so sometimes he had to be very strong with us, and he would say that the problem is that we're not enough afraid of Maya, and that Maya has this potency to throw us or to cover us. And I saw how you can be in complete illusion and everyone can see it and you can't see it. So we are so small that we always have to be begging for shelter. So these are, big lessons that we were young people, we were all learning. But one thing I can say is, one thing that was very important for me is that I had a lot of really good support, good friends, such nice devotees that were around me. I mean, they didn't, I don't think we even talked about it, but just the company of friends in Krishna consciousness, it really helps us to get through difficulties. Very important to have people that it's not enough to just live around devotees, be with devotees. I'm here in Mayapur, there's thousands of devotees, but how many people are really friends that you can be confidential with and that give you support through the times that you need it, So another amazing thing that happened in 75, early 75, like February must have been, the majority of the devotees from Paris left for India because for Gaur Purnima and for the opening of Krishna Balaram Mandir, and Prabhupada wanted as many devotees as possible to come. So much of the temple went, and being a pujari, I had to stay back, and so I missed out on that historic Mayapur Vrindavan Hyderabad festival, which was a major watershed event, big change in our society at this time. That's when, it really, we got, India opened up. And I think it's important for devotees to understand just how revolutionary this opening of that temple was, how powerful Srila Prabhupada was to be able to do this, how important it was. I mean, we had very little idea about, the history and caste consciousness and, whatever Prabhupada wanted, we just would go and do it. But, if you know more, you think of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, he was just, doing things much less radical, and he was, he had stones thrown at him, he had temples closed. I mean, for Prabhupada to open those doors on the installation day is so glorious that, with a bunch of white Brahmin boys, wearing Brahmin's threads, doing the artis. You have to understand, this had never happened in the history of this planet. What Prabhupada did is so revolutionary, so radical that, he put us right up there. And so glorious. And anyway, so many devotees went for that. And I remember really clearly when they returned, because I was doing arti. I was doing noonday arti. I remember I had the incense in my hand, and I heard a bunch of, I could hear the devotees were coming in. I knew they were going to be back. And so it's like, oh, cool, the devotees are back. And I turned around, to offer to the to the devotees, and I was just frozen. I was shocked. It looked like, they were all brown and emaciated, and I was like, oh my God, what happened to them? India was really, not easy in those days. Many of the devotees, there's no bottled water, there's no, the food, everything. We didn't know how to live there. So many devotees got ill. And I still vividly remember what the devotees looked like. But then I was informed after about how, after this glorious opening, it was sort of like everything was about the opening, but nobody was really thinking so much about the long-term project. And, as soon as the festival was over, they're like realizing that there's an extreme lack of manpower to run this mega project. Because most of the devotees who had actually worked on that project, it was so difficult. So, you could write books about, what they must have gone through. Talking to Jamuna, I remember she told me so many, what it was like for them. This was, Jamuna and Gurudas had already left, and mostly, they were like worn to the bone. I mean, they're just ready to go, except for a few devotees. So, this is like a big temple and a guest house and all this thing, and who's going to do it? So apparently they had to have an emergency GBC meeting, and everyone of the GBC was asked that they should leave one of their devotees there, so they could kind of make up a temple. Most temples just grow organically, but this was just like, okay, let's just throw in a whole bunch of people from all over the world to try to keep this thing going. And, there were no Indian devotees hardly at that time. Everything was run by, Western devotees. So, now apparently, at that time, then Narottam, my husband, was asked to be the first head pujari there. Because he's a very good pujari, very good devotee, and he had accepted to do that. And so Bhagavan, he called me into his office as soon as he returned, and he was like, well, Narottam's going to stay there. And what do you want to do? Because he was kind of aware that, I was sort of married but not married. And he really didn't want to lose Narottam, but he really didn't want to lose both of us. And so I said, you don't have to go. You can stay here and be pujari here. And but I always really badly wanted to go to Vrindavan, really badly. And so I was like, wow, this is the chance. This is it. So no, I'm going. I'm definitely going. But, Bhagavan was like, well, you just go for a while, see how it goes, and you can still do some service for us while you're there. He's trying to keep me on board in Europe, so I was like, yes, okay. And then I was off to India. So the India arrival, for me, that was just a life-altering event, getting off the plane. Now this is May, the middle of summer. So I get off the plane and, walk into an oven, just, whoosh, I remember that heat coming out. I was like, wow. And but I had this like overwhelming sense of familiarity and sort of being at home. And, of course, India was just so different then and so underdeveloped. And, there was only one kind of car, which was the ambassador, and one kind of taxi, this black and yellow, very run-down cars. And, there had been no, global interaction yet, so it was still, and so somehow I made my way, I think by bus, to the Delhi temple, and that, I would say, is a real misnomer temple. It was just a tiny little house right next to the Bengali markets, not so far from Connaught Place. And it was kind of shocking that it was just so, there's like nobody there. There's like 3 or 4 devotees, and one of them was Vishal, who, if anyone knows, was a very eccentric person. And another one was Asita, who was another one-eyed devotee who was also very eccentric. And so it was kind of a unique experience. But fortunately, I met a devotee who had been in France. Her name was Aditi. And she took me to Vrindavan by train and then by Tonga. Tonga was the thing in those days. It was quite amazing riding into Vrindavan, from Mathura on this Tonga, horse-driven, very uncomfortable but kind of fun. And I remember it was nighttime when we arrived at Krishna Balaram Temple, and there was a lot of, probably from, well, I don't know, but there was a lot of like fairy lights up on the temple. And at that time there was leading up to the temple was fountains all the way down going towards, because of course there was no samadhi and there was no Gurukula. So there was this beautiful entranceway. And, I felt I just had entered into a fairyland. It was so overwhelming and so beautiful. And I really, truly felt that I had entered another dimension. And I felt totally sold out. I'm all in. I'm into this. I'm into Vrindavan. And I didn't mind the heat. It was an experience. You read the books and you hear the theory, but then you have this experience, and that's what really sells you out. And it was truly a remarkable experience. I remember coming in, it's so planted inside of me, that feeling. And when I arrived, there were a few devotees there that said, "Oh, we're on our way to Radha Vallabh Temple because there's a full bungalow there going on. It's very special." And I have no idea what that is, but I'm in. And so we made our way, I don't remember how, down to, down through, there was nothing there, and there's no street lights, and it's just jungle. It's jungle out there. There's almost nothing. And, there's no cars going back and forth. There's, a few rickshaws. And, going into Vrindavan and going into Radha Vallabh, that, such a mystical temple, that deity. And I remember also so vividly walking into Radha Vallabh Temple that a full bungalow means that all the decoration is made from the tiny little bela or belly, they say, and the little jasmine buds. Not even a lot of it is done with buds. And just phenomenal decoration out of all jasmine. And it wasn't just like sometimes they just do it on the deities, and sometimes they do it in the deity room and the deities, but this was done in the entire temple. When I walked in there, The smell, the fragrance was like nothing that you could ever experience anywhere in this world. It was unbelievable. I felt intoxicated. I thought, wow, this is the real thing. This is the real intoxication. It was so, so beautiful. Anyway, so that was my first night. And then the next morning, somehow I had heard that that you're supposed to circumambulate Vrindavan when you arrive there. That's I don't know who told me. I don't know, but somehow I had in my head that that's what I should do. And so I asked some devotees there, and they said, well, none of them had done it. You know, most devotees at that time, they didn't do parikramas and they didn't go places hardly ever because there was so much to do in the temple and because Prabhupada kept us busy. And but still, you know, I can't remember who told me. I said, well, you just go. There's like this parikrama path. There's a path, and it goes all the way around Vrindavan. You just follow it. Yeah, go ahead, you know. So me, you know, brand new in India, it's May, you know, mad dogs and Englishmen, as the saying, are the ones who go out in the midday sun. So I'm starting after the morning program. I didn't have any water, I didn't have a hat, I didn't have any sense of the thing. But somehow I had this like determination that I really want to do this. So I started, you know, along the path and I thought, yeah, okay, this is great. I was like, and I also had no awareness of how bizarre it was for other people to see a white young girl. And also I had like red hair, freckles. I'm like a species from another planet. You know, to be all alone by yourself, going out on parikrama, and no sense of it at all, you know. So naive. And so anyway, off I went, and I was just ecstatic. I was, you know, walking along, I mean, the sandy parikrama marg, but then you get past Keshigat, and then there's nothing. And then there's just these little paths, and they're going off in different directions. And eventually I realized that I am utterly lost. I am dying of thirst, and I'm under the sun and feel like I'm going to die out here. and it was possible. It was a possibility. So, you know, I just kind of kept walking and looking. There's no people around. And then somehow or another, at some point, some old lady in white, you know, old, you know how they're bent over. And I don't know where she came from. There was a few huts around here and there. And she came up and she's like, you know, kya hai, pagal? You know, like, are you crazy? What are you doing? What are you doing? Where are you going? And then I'm trying to say, this is my first, you know, communication with some Brijvasi lady. And, you know, parikrama, you know, and so she's like, she realizes that I just don't know what I'm doing. I'm lost and I'm out in the sun. And she says, come, you know. And she kept telling me, I took my shoes. I knew you're supposed to go in your bare feet, but it was blazing hot. I have the most sensitive feet. And it was blazing. And so I, you know, at some point I was like, forget it, put on the shoes. And so she kept, you know, and she said, follow me, but she kept yelling at me, take your shoes off, take your shoes. So I'd take them off, and then she'd look, and then I'd stick them back on. Oh, my Lord. And she, you know, Krishna just sent that lady. I don't know what would have happened. I don't know. But when we finally got to what is now Bhaktivedanta Swami Marg, and you could see the temple spires, she pointed to me, and then she just disappeared back. And I'm like, I owe that lady my life. Where did she go? Never saw her again. And so I came back into the temple and I went into the room and I passed out on the floor. And I woke up and there were all these devotees around me and they were pouring water over. They had my head in a little bucket of water. And, you know, long story short, I had a very severe sunstroke and dehydration and, you know, the whole thing. So, which lasted quite a while, and it was a pretty awful, severe headache and, you know, the whole thing. So that was my, as we say, my entry into Sri Vrindavan Dham, you know, my first purification, as we like to say. But, you know, it was still, I'm glad I did it. And, you know, so at that time, you know, still it was a small group of devotees there. There was not a lot of, I don't know how many, but it was not a big temple. A small group of devotees, and it was very common in those days to have malaria, to have typhoid. It's like the common cold. So it was very austere. There was really no money, like it had not been set up how this temple was going to run. Now, Tejas was collecting in Delhi. Tejas, one amazing devotee who his glories have not been sung yet, but I hope one day they will be, because he just did remarkable things in Delhi as alone. Very kind of eccentric devotee. And he was supporting Krishna Balaram Temple through his collections. And yeah, so it was not easy, but it was also very blissful. There were not many visitors. You know, as I say, we were out there in the boondocks, as they say. And nevertheless, I got engaged in some different services, helping with the deities, jewelry, and putting things away, and, you know, whatever. And I was cooking the afternoon offering. And it was absolutely shocking to go in there. First of all, you know, mostly it was coal fires in May with, you know, hardly no electricity, no fan. I mean, it was just unbelievably austere. But the main thing that was austere is there was no boga, there was no ghee, there was, you know, they just didn't have, like, I went in, I was used to Paris. Now in Paris, we spent money on the deities. Like, we had unlimited nuts and cream and paneer and, you know, all kinds of fruits and, you know, and, you know, there was just like nothing, and they had these big plates, and like, I think there was like, for everybody, how many deities? 13 deities? These big plates, and then you'd have like 2 bananas to cut up, and oh, wow, it was shocking. It was very different. And at first I was staying in the guest house with Rasagya, a wonderful, amazing devotee friend who's no longer with us, but we were staying in the guest house because, you know, nobody was coming to stay there. And then Prabhupada heard about it, and he was like, no way, get them out of there. You know, how will the guests come if we're occupying the rooms, you know? So we were moved somewhere else. And later Prabhupada, when we got this Tapuria house, they called it, which became the Goshala, Prabhupada said, you know, the women, the Grihastas, and, you know, they should go over there, not be, you know, in the guest house, you know. But I remember my first trips into Loy Bazaar, you know, were so incredibly different that you couldn't even imagine. It was just, you know, a dusty little village, really. You know, I remember going to Radha Damodar and being kind of like shocked, you know, that it was so, you know, there was one light bulb hanging with cobwebs draped on it, and there was like this cloth on the altar that looked like, you know, like your grandmother's something. It was just like, wow, at least there, that was my impression, And the shops, the Ganga Prasad and all these shops that are so well stocked, they just, a few gumshoes, and they were very simple, very, very simple. And, it was very eco-friendly at that time, mostly none of the, I don't know, the Western drinks and plastic bags and none of that was there. If you were going into town for something, you had to take your bag or there was no way to carry it back unless, they had some old newspapers that you could use. But it was very interesting. It was interesting for us, and it was interesting for the shopkeepers to interact and to get to know each other, because we were really a phenomena that was so new and so interesting. There was a lot of suspicion. Who are we? Why are we there? People from America, that it's like the heavenly planets or something coming to this dusty village. What? Why? And I remember my first conversation with actually Ganga Prasad, was the father of, we all know the brothers that now have different shops. But the father was a really, really nice, really gentleman, real Vaishnav. And he used to like to talk philosophy. And I remember him saying to me once, it shocked me. He said, yeah, Vrindavan, 80%, 90% Mayavadi. And I was like, what? What? How's that possible? Everyone loves Krishna. Yes, but what is beyond Krishna? So I thought, well, he must know, he lives here. But, there was such, it was so austere living there that I remember once finding out, someone told Rasagya that at the Kari Bhavan in Loy Bazaar, they sell jars of honey. And it was like, oh my God, honey? I remember we got our rupees together and we went down there like we were scoring drugs or something. And then when we went for lunch prasadam, there were some chapatis, and then we stashed a few chapatis, and then I remember going in the room and smearing it with the honey, and just oh, so good. It was like this decadent enjoyment, So just to give you a little, what it was like. But it was wonderful. It was so wonderful to be there. I'm so happy that I had an opportunity to be there when there was a sandy path, walking on that Parikrama path. And I remember when I was there, one of the first times that I walked along that path, and I suddenly had this I had this feeling of this atmosphere. And I had this realization, that, oh, this is what Prabhupada brought. This is what Prabhupada brought to the West. When you're in his company, in his presence, this is what it felt like. This is what it feels like. He is bringing Vrindavan in his heart to the world. It was a very, very beautiful moment. So meanwhile, while I was enjoying being in Vrindavan, in France, Srila Prabhupada had made a visit in May or June of 75, and he visited for 24 hours the new Mayapur property. And at that time, Bhagavan said to him, well, what I guess what deities should we get? And he said we could get Radha and Krishna. And then Prabhupada looked at him like he'd said something kind of shocking and wrong. To Bhagavan's surprise, he said, "We cannot worship Radha and Krishna." Now, meanwhile, there were already temples that, of course, had Radha and Krishna, so Bhagavan was like, "Oh, okay, well," and then Prabhupada started talking about how, no, we worship Gaur-Nitai. Only by the mercy of Gaur-Nitai can we make spiritual progress. And so then Bhagavan started going along and thinking, well, I guess this is a special instruction for here, that we will focus on Gaur-Nitai. And then Prabhupada was silent for a while, and then he said, and we could get Krishna and Balaram. And that was a real surprise, because there was no other Krishna Balaram other than just been installed at Krishna Balaram temple in Vrindavan. So that was exciting. And then Bhagavan became happy, and he was, they talked about that for a bit. And then after some time, Prabhupada was quiet for a little while. And then he said, and then after you can get Radha and Krishna. So Prabhupada just, he didn't want us to take things cheaply, understand who we are, where we are, and, so he, toned it down, and then, gave allowance. And so they had not, at that time, devotees hadn't moved in yet. So then Narottam and I were there in Vrindavan. So we were asked to go to Jaipur, and then we would get Gaur-Nitai for, first to begin with Gaur-Nitai for New Mayapur, and then we would order Krishna and Balaram. So then this was a very exciting experience that Narottam and I left to go to Jaipur and spend some days there, and to oversee, to see the painting and the carving and everything of Gaur-Nitai, and the packing, and the ordering of Krishna and Balaram. So during that time, it was very interesting that we had heard that Prabhupada had eaten at the LMB Hotel. It's a very famous restaurant there. And that he had glorified the cooking there. And somehow, it became bona fide because Prabhupada ate there. And we didn't, that wasn't something that we did. So it was kind of, a new thing. So Narottam and I, we would go because Narottam is an amazing cook, incredible cook. And so we would just open up the menu, and everything was so new to us. What is all this stuff? So we just get a few things from each. We'll have a little of this and this and this. And then Narottam would, we'd eat everything and figure out, well, what's in it? What is it? Writing, taking notes. And then Narottam, he actually wound up going into the kitchen. And you can imagine the cooks were just, over the moon, this Western boy with his big sika coming in and, interested, so interested in what they were doing. And it was very beautiful. So this experience of going to Jaipur, this opened up a new service for me that I'll talk more about as we go along, because this became, one of my services, a main service that I did for, 35, 40 years, whatever, a long time. So going back to Vrindavan, now there is another, embarrassing story. just another challenge time that I think should be told. Now, Narottam, he had developed an attraction to a beautiful young girl, and I was aware of it, and, you know, I said, well, what do you want to do? You know, we were not really like a married couple. So I was like, well, I don't know, maybe you could marry her, but, you know. And I had the feeling that she was kind of, wasn't going to do it anyway. But somehow or another, he wound up writing a letter to Srila Prabhupada asking if he could have a second wife. Now, you can imagine the newly opened Krishna Balaram Mandir. The pujari is asking this, and Srila Prabhupada was like, no way. We cannot condone such a thing. You cannot be in that post there. And, you know, so it was a difficult time and something difficult for Narottam to swallow. At the same time, that young woman wound up going away with somebody else anyway. And eventually Narottam, it was a difficult, you know, to be the head pujari at that time. It was not an easy task. And I'm not clear on exactly what happened, but he had to get a new visa, he had to leave, and he also, you know, wound up going down soon. He just basically left. He left the service in Vrindavan, and he wound up in Bombay, where he became the head pujari there. And he's still in Bombay to this day. And so I stayed, you know, to prepare everything for Gornitai's installation and to oversee the carving of Krishna Balarams, and also to prepare for their installation that would be coming up the next year. And so I started this service of getting deities carved and buying things for their, all the shringar and all the dresses and mukuts and all the things required. And now during this time when I was there, Srila Prabhupada was there, not all the time, but a couple of times Srila Prabhupada was there. And at that time, Prabhupada, I didn't really get to see him much. On his morning walks, I remember, you know, Dhananjaya was the temple president, and Prabhupada was very different in Vrindavan and in India in general, I think, but especially in Vrindavan, than he was in the West. He was more like the temple president in Vrindavan, like he wanted to know about every details, how much ghee were we using to cook, how much did we sell the Mahaprasadam for, you know, was there profit, was there loss, was there, you know, he really wanted to know all the details, because first of all, he was so protective, you know, that, you know, he knew that we were always being cheated as Westerners, and you know, we were just naive and didn't understand much about, you know, so he was very restrictive. He told us not to go anywhere, not to, you know, just everything is here within the walls of the Krishna Balaram Mandir. So he was very strong about that, because he knew, you know, we're like babies, little kids that would go and, you know, you run outside and get hit by a car. You know, so he just knew that he needed to protect us from so much that we didn't understand. We knew very little about what was going on outside, other sampradayas, the Gaudiya Math, the different, you know, we just, you know, knew very little about, you know, even Gaudiya history or anything, you know. So Prabhupada was very protective and very strong, and firm. And, whereas in the West, mostly we would see him as giving classes, and he just was very, very warm and very, but he was much more strict and strong in India because there were dangers that we were not aware of. And another thing that was wonderful of my experience was that there was a 24-hour kirtan going on, and all of the devotees were expected to participate. Now that was not easy. Like nowadays, you have the special devotees which Ayendra worked out a system that really worked because it was devotees who were just dedicated to doing that, But at this time, everybody had service all day long and people are busy, and then you have to fit in also to do your, your hours in the kirtan. And so I remember having a time with, I think it was Dhananjaya and Balagopal, I'm not sure, but it was in the middle of the night. And imagine chanting in the quiet temple room in the middle of the night. That was the most mystical and transcendental experience, all alone in there. It was really very, very beautiful, but it was a difficult thing to maintain. Like lots of times people didn't come, they didn't show up, and it was difficult, but it was also very, very wonderful. Now around, I'm not good at the time frame when it was, but I was asked to go because I was there waiting for different things to get made and, doing services, but I had free time. And so I was asked to go to Delhi to be the pujari for a little while. I think maybe it was a DT, I'm not sure who it was, but whoever was the head pujari there had to go somewhere. And so I was going to fill in. And of course I said, where's that, that little temple with Radhapartha Sarati, these very beautiful little deities. And, they were, being the pujari there meant that you did everything. You cooked all the offerings, and you dressed and you undressed, and, I'd run across the street to Bengali market to buy some, Prabhupada said we could buy the sweets from there, the milk sweets, and buy some garlands, and I tried to make some outfits in my spare time, which was not really much spare time. And I remember sitting there and having to bang the stick while we made the offering because the mice would come and, jump on the plate. So I would just sit there and bang the stick so that the mice didn't come, So while I was there, I think in August, there was suddenly Srila Prabhupada was coming, and he was just going to come for one day because he was, somehow he had wanted to meet with Indira Gandhi, and a meeting had been arranged, and so he just flew in. And I'm pretty sure, I know Brahmananda Swami was there, and Harikesh, maybe Navi Yogendra. And the Delhi temple was, Madira was a wife of Tejas, and she had just had a little baby. And we lived down the road from the temple. There was a little apartment. So we moved onto the roof with the baby, just on the roof. So Prabhupada could stay in that apartment. And so I remember that Prabhupada came, and, we were just, he came up onto the roof to get his massage. And we were like, oh, Prabhupada's here, what to do? We had nowhere to go. And Prabhupada said, no, you can stay. And then he realized that we were like living up there. We had rolled up sleeping bags there. And he was very kind to us, and he let us stay. And I remember sitting on the stairwell outside the room and listening to him as he was discussing various things about ISKCON development in his room. And I know that one of the leaders there didn't like that I was sitting and listening, so he went to shut the door. And Prabhupada knew I was there, and Prabhupada said, no, leave it open, no harm. And so he was kind. And so then Prabhupada went to have this meeting with Indira Gandhi. And thinking about how long I've been speaking on here. And I'm thinking to pause this video right now, and I'll begin again with his meeting with Indira Gandhi. Hare Krishna.